The big rule you have to know is that you always need to understand your options when it comes to two main things: building a customized feature from scratch or integrating with a third-party service. Okay, we're getting a bit more advanced now, but you need to know these things in order to grow your app. Once you start building out tricky features that involve a lot of customization, you have some choices to make. Should you build that customized feature yourself, or should you try to find a third-party service to integrate with? To help you decide, we're going to break down the pros and cons of each. Let's start with building these customized features yourself. Every time I run up against the question of whether or not to build a feature myself, I always ask if building the feature from scratch will mean reinventing the wheel, and if so, whether it's really worth it. So when you find yourself making the decision of whether to build out a custom feature yourself or use a third-party service, try to consider, and I mean really consider, what your reasons are for reinventing the wheel. Will your version of a feature be better than an existing app's? Will it be simpler or maybe more advanced? If you can't decide whether you have reason to build something instead of integrating, go through the following with me. First, let's talk about the benefits of building a feature yourself, starting with customization. When choosing to build features from scratch, your ability to customize is endless. While there might be apps out there doing similar things as the features you have in mind, they might not offer exactly what you're envisioning. If that's the case, and you're willing to put in the time, building from scratch might be the right option. Then you have third-party maintenance. Apps go down, they need maintenance, and it doesn't always happen on your schedule. When relying on a third-party app, you're also relying on them being adamant about doing maintenance in off-peak hours and keeping their service up and running the vast majority of the time. If you're at all worried about a third-party integration going down at the exact time you need it to be running like a well-oiled machine, building from scratch could be the better option. Not only that, also consider third-party failure. We never want other startups and founders to fail, but it happens. Apps fall off the grid all the time. And if a third-party service you're using does the same, you could be left scrambling to pick up the pieces. If you're not confident in a potential integration, think hard about what kind of damage control you'd have to do if it went out of business. And of course, there's also cost, which is always a factor with app integrations. Maybe you found the absolute perfect service to handle your app's custom feature, but it's way out of budget. If that's the case, you might have no choice but to build from scratch. And of course, one of the biggest advantages to building a custom feature yourself is the peace of mind that comes along with it. Often, you'll find third-party services have limitations. Maybe they're perfect when you first integrate, but after time, their growth doesn't match up with your own. Maybe with more users on board your app, that third-party service no longer works. And at that point, you could be left with having to build the feature yourself anyway. In that case, by building a feature yourself from the start, you'd never have to worry about another app becoming obsolete or not enough for what you need. By building a feature yourself from the start, you could simply update and iterate the feature as needed. Not only that, to add to the first couple points, apps change. Their features, options, pricing, and even priorities often change over time. By building features yourself, you'd never have to worry about an app pivoting and leaving you scrambling because of it. But like with anything, there are drawbacks to building a feature yourself too, when you could simply integrate with a third-party service instead. Let's break down the pros of going with a third-party service. To start, it can be a huge time saver. A great example of an app I constantly use is Zapier, which is a service that lets you connect your app to a bunch of outside services that offer features you might need. Now, I could build out each and every one of those features myself instead of using Zapier, but the time and cost comparison just doesn't make it worthwhile. Integrating with Zapier saves me a ton of time. The same is true of other apps I use, like the scheduling feature on my own site, or the software I use to house all the tutorials in my VIP membership. Collectively, integrating with those services instead of building them out has saved me tons of time. Often, integrating is worth it for that reason alone. Another big one is that integrating with a third party means there's no testing required on your end. If a third-party app you're considering is reputable and widely used, chances are it's been tested to near perfection. That means all you have to do is plug and play, so to speak. In comparison, building a comprehensive feature on your own involves tons of testing. This goes back to saving time, but it goes beyond that aspect as well. Yes, you'll be saving time by not having to test, but you'll also be saving users from running into unforeseen bugs that you might not catch during your own testing. Another benefit to connecting with third-party services is the familiarity they offer your users. Often, the apps we integrate with are ones our own apps users are already familiar with. Say you integrate Google Calendar with your app, for example. Most of your users will already be comfortable using that feature, meaning they'll also be more comfortable using your app. This theory applies to e-commerce as a whole. Think about it. Who are you more likely to make an online purchase from? Amazon or some random website you've never heard of before? Then you have to consider your overall priorities. If a third-party service will give your app a function that's not necessarily a core feature, it doesn't always make sense to build it out on your own, mainly because it falls pretty far down on your priority list. This goes back to our Moscow matrix and figuring out your must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and won't-haves. If adding a feature isn't one of your must or should-haves, integrating with another app can help you continue to focus only on your top-of-list goals, rather than sidetracking. Okay, so that was the third big rule I wanted to cover, but I also want to expand on it to give you some more context. First, you have to consider how you'd even integrate with a third-party service if that's the route you choose to go with. You have a couple of options. With really simple features like a chatbot, for example, the third-party service you're using might just give you a small string of code to put on your app's page wherever you want it to show up. I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. Let's say you want to use the Crisp customer support chat widget. This is so that you can offer your users real-time support with a chat. Now, to speed this along, I already signed up for a free account, so of course you'd have to choose the plan you want and customize it to your preferences. I'm currently looking at the inbox in my Crisp account. If I head over to my settings, and then website settings, and then finally integrations, Crisp will give me an HTML option to copy some code and add to my app. So I'm going to select that, and here's the code. So I'm going to select all of this, right-click, and copy this code. And I can see that Crisp is telling me to paste the code into my page and add it to the HTML head section of my page. So I'm going to show you where that is in Bubble. I'm going to go over back to the editor. And you might notice the HTML element right here from your visual elements list. This is actually going to insert code into the body of your page. It is HTML, and it's perfect for cases where the HTML can go into the body, and if you're instructed to do so, that's perfect. I would just add this element to the page, and I would normally be pasting that code in here, and I'd be good to go. But Crisp specified for this to go into the head of the page. So I'm going to remove this element and open up the property editor for the entire page. I did that by double-clicking on the page, and it pulled up the property editor. So I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom, and I can see here page HTML header. So now I'm going to paste in, using Control-V on my keyboard, the code. You can also see that you can open up an HTML editor to read your code a little bit more clearly like that. All right, so now I'm going to preview this page by clicking the preview button up here and see how it looks for the user on the front end. Great, so I can see my Crisp widget has appeared on the lower right corner of the page. If I click it, I can start to interact with it. If I start typing a message like, "Hi, I am looking for some info," and send, and go back to my Crisp dashboard here. I'm going to close this out, go back to my inbox. Here's the latest message that I just sent, and it's all hooked up. It's really as simple as just copying that code and pasting it back into the application. To customize this chat box, you'd go back into whatever third-party service you're using and edit it there. So even though that process involves code, you don't actually have to know how to code, just where to put it. And usually these services will give you very clear instructions on how to add that code to your app. Now, the other two options for integrating with a third-party service are a little more involved. To start, you can simply use a plugin if you find one that does exactly what you need.
It's really easy to add a plugin to your app. All you need to do is go into the Plugins tab here on the left, and then click Add Plugins. There's dozens and dozens of plugins available here that you can search. Here's an example of a really popular one that a lot of bubblers like to install into their app. This is the Google Analytics plugin. So this will allow you to add your Google Analytics tracking code to your application really easily so that you can track your users' behavior on your application through Google Analytics. So I just searched Google Analytics. You can actually see there's a few of them here. I'm going to install the one that's published by Bubble. And once it's installed, I can close this window. And you can see here I have a couple setup options for this specific plugin. So every plugin is going to have different setup options. They might require you to add in like an ID from the service that you're using. It really just depends. But every plugin will have a page for you with more information for how to set that up. So all I would need to do here is grab my tracking ID from my Google Analytics account, and then it's instantly connected. Google Analytics will be able to track who's visiting my application, what pages they're looking at, how long they're on the site, things like that. Most of the plugins are free, but there are some paid plugins that give you a little bit more functionality. It really just depends on what you need, but the library is growing bigger and bigger every day because bubblers themselves can publish their own plugins. So it's a really handy area to expand functionality on your app.
If you don't find a plugin that does what you need though, you'll need to connect via API. Now, I'm not going to teach you about APIs in these lessons because that's a more advanced topic, and I have a whole other video series on APIs you can get through my website. But I am going to give you the information you need to know to start working with APIs in the first place, because once you know this, it'll open up a whole new world for your app.
The first thing to know about APIs is that it's only available for apps that are on a paid plan. So this is functionality that is for more serious workflows where Bubble is doing a little bit more work. API workflows, when it comes to your Bubble app, they are just like regular workflows that we create for any pages. But they are only run on the server side. So that means that there is no front-end design, no front-end page that is related to a server-side workflow. You can think of server-side workflows as like a background process. This allows us to schedule things to happen in the future. We can run workflows that do a lot of work, make a lot of changes, or create a lot of records in our database for big, heavy processes. And the user doesn't need to be around. We don't need someone to be logged into the application to watch something happen or even wait for something to happen. A server-side workflow just kind of happens in the background, and that's where we can really create powerful functionality, especially when it comes to scheduling things or having something happen on a recurring frequency. So to enable this type of functionality in your application, you would need to go to the Settings tab of your editor and expose your application's workflow API. So if I do that, I'll check this box, and once I do that, in my page list dropdown, I have this new section here that shows up, API workflows. So I'll click on that, and you can see I'm taken to what looks very much like the regular workflow area. I have a box here that I can use to create like a workflow event. In this scenario, it's called an API endpoint. So if I go to create an API endpoint, then it's very familiar here. I can still create actions just like I can on the page, but all of this is happening on the server. So the difference between workflows and actions that happen here is that they're never going to be related to a page. I can't show things on a page, like show an alert message or take some value that came from an input directly. So while you do have to be a little bit more comfortable with workflows in general, this does give you the flexibility to create really powerful functionality. I'm going to show you an example here of a really popular use case for API workflows, and this is great for introducing yourself to the API workflows area if you're not familiar with it already. So I'm actually going to close this. I'm going to delete that endpoint. You can see that I have another option. I can either create an API endpoint or I can create a new recurring event. Bubble has split these two up because a recurring event is kind of special. It's one that Bubble automates so that it can run on some frequency. So it can run every single month, every day, every week. Whatever you want to happen here, Bubble will automatically create a schedule for your application to run this workflow on whatever frequency you decide. So here's an example. I will create a new recurring event here. And again, this is only available within the API workflow section. And I'm going to call it Send Weekly Newsletter. Okay, and I want to send a weekly email, a weekly newsletter to my users. So I'm going to tell this recurring endpoint that it's going to be working with users. Okay, so this is the type of data that this recurring endpoint will need to know about. Okay, and so when this runs, all I want it to do is send an email. Okay, so now within my email form, I can fill out all the things about my what I want to go into the body of the email, the subject. So who I want the email to go to, I can click here to insert dynamic data like we've seen before. And I want to send it to the current workflow user. So this just means the person who is receiving, who's being affected by this weekly workflow. So I set this up as a type user. So now this knows, okay, we're going to work with the user. We're going to send this email to that user's email address. Okay, and then the sender name is me, so it can be, Gabby at Coaching No Code Apps, something like that. The subject can be weekly newsletter. And I can insert dynamic data to maybe include the date. Like this, current date and time. Whatever the date is that this triggers, it's going to insert that date and time. I can actually have it say newsletter for week of something like that. Then it's clear, and every time they get an email, this subject will be different because the date and time will be different. And I can fill out the body. So now this is set up so that whenever this runs, the email will go out and all of my information will be there. Okay, but how do you trigger this? How do you set up the frequency? You would do that from a page. So I'm going to go back to my index page here. And I'm just going to add a simple button to the page to say, turn on weekly newsletter. Turn on weekly newsletter. And so let's assume that one of your users is logged into your app and they're looking at their account settings. You've given them a place to update their email and also turn on the ability to receive weekly newsletter. So when they click on this button, we'll start a new workflow. So I'm going to add an action. This will be a custom event action because this is a slightly more advanced type of action. We are going to be reaching into the API workflow, so that's where all of those actions live here. And there is an action specifically for setting up a recurring event. So I'll select that. And the recurring event is also, the functionality there also really depends on the plan you are on with Bubble. So not only do you need to be on a paid plan to use API workflows in general, but the plan you are on does dictate how frequently you can run a recurring event. So right now, these are the options, but your plan will, I believe the lowest paid plan you can run things monthly. You can't run anything more frequently than that. So the next plan up, you can run up to a weekly, on a weekly schedule. And then the one up above that, you can do daily. So let's say I want to do the weekly newsletter and I'm on the right plan that allows me to do that. I'll select that for the frequency. The recurring event is that event I created, send weekly newsletter. This was created in the API workflow section. Remember, right now I'm on the page so that the user can trigger this to happen and really get the setup going so that Bubble can then automate it. The workflow thing, remember how I set the recurring event to be a type user. And when it sends an email, it's sending it to the current workflow user. So here, this action is saying, all right, which user are we going to pass to this recurring event? And I'm just going to select the current user, which refers to the logged in user. So I'm clicking the button, I'm logged into my account. I'm going to say, this is for me. I am the current user and I want the recurring event to send emails to me. And then the start date is when you want this recurring event to begin. So they could be logged in on Monday, click on this button, but we could have the start date be dynamic so they don't start receiving weekly newsletters until the next Monday. It doesn't have to be immediately. You can actually say when to start that. So here would be some date value. I'm just going to enter in current date and time for this example. So that's what you would need to do to set it up, is just run this one action. And as soon as this triggers, Bubble will automatically run that recurring event workflow. I'm going to go back to it here. Every single week. And every single week, it's going to send an email to that user, to their email address. In order to stop this, if they wanted to stop receiving emails, for example, you would want to design an area, within the user's account profile, something like that, where they can click another button. I'm going to duplicate this here to turn it off. And it's a very similar setup to turn off the recurring event. So I'll start edit this workflow. So we have two separate ones here for the two different buttons. And I'm going to use the same action, set cancel a recurring event. So to cancel a recurring event, first I would need to select the event I'm working with. And then again, the workflow thing is current user. And I'll set the frequency to none. So this would stop that recurring action. Bubble will no longer automate any more emails to go out on any schedule. It'll just stop it completely. And if we wanted to turn it back on, the user would have to click on this button all over again. So that's one really popular use case for API workflows, especially for those of you who are not familiar with APIs in general. This is a great introduction to creating some workflow that runs on the server, because again, the user does not have to be present for this to happen. So I wanted to point this section out because this is really where you take your app to the next level. A lot of business tools make use of things that are scheduled, workflows that are much more complicated, and workflows specifically that have to work with a lot of data records in one time. If you're making a change to thousands of records, at one time, or even, on a recurring basis, you definitely want to do that in the API workflow section so that it happens on the server and not on the client side, meaning on the browser page, so that your users aren't experiencing it and they don't run into any performance issues.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. At the beginning of this series, you learned why it's absolutely critical for you to build the base of your app the right way from the start. We called it putting down roots, and it's crucial you remember that because your app needs to be set up for success right from the start. If you were building a simple hobby app and didn't plan to do anything with it, that might not be the case. But since your app is intended to serve a business purpose, to either be a business or support one, this part has to be taken seriously. We also covered 7 key strategies to keep in mind while you're building that base. It starts with understanding the anatomy of an app and being able to identify what will make up the front-end design, which is what the user experiences, and what'll make up the back end, which involves your database and the workflows that pull everything together. You also now know the capabilities Bubble gives you with your app and some of the limitations. You know how to plan for a native app from the start and what options you have when it comes to building different types of apps, whether that means a web versus a mobile one, or whether you're talking about your type of app in terms of niche, like gaming apps, for example. We also went through an overview of the tools Bubble gives you when building an app. And I encourage you to explore those more because there are a lot of them. Knowing which major ones to turn to throughout development will help you move forward more quickly though. Another major aspect we covered is the Moscow matrix and building a strategic priority list for your app's features, which you won't be able to move forward efficiently without. With that feature list, you now know how to move throughout development efficiently. You know starting with your database, then moving to the first page a user will see, and then connecting the two is the smartest way to avoid a bunch of back and forth as you develop. And potentially, one of the most important things is you know how Bubble thinks and how precisely literal you have to be when telling it what to do. Yes, Bubble is an if this then that type platform, but there are a lot of details within that phrase that have to be accounted for. You also know Bubble is dynamic and lets you change and evolve as you go. That's something that holds way too many people back, but you don't have to be limited now. In these last lessons, we went over some more high-level aspects, like understanding what options each Bubble tool gives you. Remember that there's usually more than one way you can use an element or tool, and you have to go through your property editor in detail in order to choose your best option forward. We also dive into your database and understanding your options. I'm not going to go through all of that again because it was a ton of information, but that's one of the most critical elements to get confident with. And now you know the difference between using plugins, APIs, and self-built features. You know how to decide which option is right for your app and how to get started with each of those options on your own. We even brushed on setting up your app to use APIs. Remember, we covered a lot of information and I don't expect you to have it all down right away. Go back through these videos and take notes. Practice on your own and refer back to those notes when needed. It's a lot to soak in and it'll take some practice, but I encourage you to get started right away while everything's still fresh.